Welcome to the Pod of Inquiry, pushing the envelope for human understanding and optimization, the podcast for podiatrists. The Pod of Inquiry is designed to empower you with knowledge. What happens from there is up to you. Your host, Dr. Stephen Barrett, has designed this show to take you down some very deep rabbit holes, hopefully bringing you back out again, relatively unscathed, but cerebrally whipped, enabling a better understanding of all things worthy of inquiry. If you have more questions after the show, then that is good. The new discovery today many times was the new discovery 50 years ago, only to be suppressed or plainly ignored. Medicine and surgery can sometimes take a long while to get their paradigm shifted. We hope to have a lot of fun on this show and maybe destroy some ridiculous dogma along the journey. Thanks for joining the show today. Let's start spelunking.
All right, Dr. T. Nguyen, thank you for coming on the show today, and I appreciate your time and expertise. We're going to talk about direct care and some of the nuances that are involved with that. So why don't you start off, tell us a little bit about your story and how you got to this arena.
Thanks so much for having me, Dr. Barrett. You know, I love talking about this, right? Direct care. It's not really a new concept, but it's like renewed. It's kind of like minimally invasive surgery. It had once existed, it evolved, and then it came back. So direct care is the same way. It's the way medicine used to be, where the physician would show up for a service and then they would get paid, and that was it. Somewhere along the way, insurance got in the way, and then it got all dicey and confusing and expensive. So I'll certainly talk more about the details of the problems we have and how to fix it with direct care. So I'm a podiatrist in Santa Cruz. I'm Dr. T. Nguyen. I go by Dr. T since my husband's also a doctor, but he goes by Dr. Nguyen. So that's how I differentiate us two. I have a private practice here in Santa Cruz County. I started in 2018. I had finished up my wound fellowship in Dallas in 2015, came out to Santa Cruz in 2016. I was employed, didn't love it, had a daughter in 2018, and decided if I really wanted control in my schedule to just do the thing myself. So I opened up my practice in the insurance model. And then a year into my private practice, I thought I was, it was kind of the honeymoon phase where everything was exciting. I was seeing progress. I was seeing money come in. I was growing my team. And then I got really, really depleted really fast. Just could not keep up financially in the insurance model because half of my overhead was to accommodate the things that insurance needed, like having a high volume of patients, having a biller, having a billing software that was confusing on its own, trying to go through the contracts and trying to apply and having to wait for months to just get on contract, and then having to wait for even more months to get paid, and then learning how to code and to bill. So it just got really exhausting. And I had to self-reflect and say, is this the practice I really wanted, or was it just something everybody else was doing? And then I realized it wasn't what I wanted to do. And then I started to learn about a more simple way to practice medicine, kind of in the way of like you going to the grocery store, you know what you want, you know the price of things, and then you get to choose, and then you're done, right? I wanted medicine to be that way. I just wanted to have a door that was open for people who needed me, and if they wanted my services, that they would just pay and we'd be done with the transaction immediately. So that's what I have today.
Well, it took me a little longer to get to the direct pay model. It took me about 36 years to finally succumb and figure it out. And so I'm kind of a novice and a neophyte to this area, but I can tell you my personal experience has been pretty extraordinary. The insurance situation is so corrupt that it doesn't benefit the patients at all, really, if you look at it. And it's a disaster from a cost standpoint, like you mentioned, all that we have to put into pre-authorizations, denials, appeals, all of this. And it is just time, effort, and resources that are taken away from actual delivery of care to the patient.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I think that's one of the biggest things, is that we get in these, for lack of a better way to put it, we start running on the treadmill, and then at some point in time, the treadmill just keeps getting set on a higher and higher pace, and we keep running and running, and then finally you get to the point where you just can't do it anymore, and you just either have to quit or you have to change the model. And I think that was really the story for me, is that I didn't really want to do what I really loved to do anymore because of all of the constraints that was placed on me by these third-party insurances. And now, you can actually treat the patient, spend time with them. You're not treating the computer, getting all of these ridiculous little bullet points that have to be checked. And they mean nothing as far as the ultimate care of that patient. So it's really quite it's an emancipation. It's a total freedom. And, we'll talk about some barriers to entry, but I commend you for going to the direct care model so quickly early in your career, because it's not always easy to do.
Yeah, I think I tend to take action quickly, sometimes to my own detriment, but I also learn lessons faster in that way. Could I have prepared a lot better in the way that I started to opt out? Definitely. But I think my position was a little bit unique in that I had a daughter at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And it was really important to me to be available to her. So no
Right.
matter what situation I was in, whether it be employed or my private practice, the number one thing I really needed was time in my schedule. And that wasn't possible in an employed position. And that was really impossible in my private practice when I was bound by insurance. And I had to work after hours just to complete charting to submit for billing and all of the verifications involved to get patients what they need. And so I really wanted this model to show other people who had a life outside of medicine. Medicine these days is no longer working your Monday through Friday or even Monday through Saturday, 9 hours a day. You can have flexibility, enjoy the work that you do, and have life outside of that too. So we are a lot more accepting and more dynamic of what medicine looks like for each person.
Absolutely. What when you decided to make this change for yourself personally, how long did it take you to transform from the regular model of healthcare to direct care?
The seed in my mind started around 2019. I had sought out a consultant because I was struggling financially. I thought it was my financial situation that put me where I was. I was at a point where money was leaking out of my bank account and it went under. I went negative in my debit account, and I was really mortified. I had never been irresponsible with my money. I always knew how to track it. I knew where it was going, but it was just pouring out in all of these different places. And I felt like I had no control. So the thought came by listening to other people who had cash practices or just different service industries where their jobs just looked so much easier because there was no such thing as insurance. You go to a plumber, there's no insurance for that.
Right.
Even with your car, you need new tires, your insurance doesn't cover that, right? There is
Right.
just a basic understanding that certain things are paid out of pocket. And then I saw how plastic surgery, a lot of their aesthetic stuff was cash. But podiatry doesn't really have that aesthetic branch. So, but I wanted to know if it was possible. So I think I just kind of fell into a rabbit hole between the end of 2019. I got introduced to it early in 2020. And then from 2020, the pandemic hit. And I was like, well, the time to make a significant change is either now,
Right.
when everything's a mess, everything's unpredictable, or I get stuck comfortable and then wait decades to change. And I didn't want my future to be projected in that way. So early 2020, I started to make the plans to gradually opt out of one insurance at a time. And the hardest one for me was the first one because it was one of the major payers for my revenue in the collections. And I said, well, I think if I just take these small steps at a time, feel what it feels like, see how it impacts my practice, financially and emotionally, then it'll give me kind of motivation to move forward or not. So I was kind of full throttle by September 2020. I opted out. It hurt a lot because I didn't know what to expect. I thought I was abandoning my patients by telling them I didn't take their insurance anymore. But then the reality is they still had the choice to pick me or somebody else, right? They're picking with their dollars.
Right.
And so I think I just had to accept some of those facts that, yeah, I was going to lose a lot of people, but I'm also not for a lot of people too. I wanted a micro practice that worked for me.
Right.
So probably within the year, I started to make those choices.
Right. So I think one of the things that you have this base of patients that are used to seeing you and used to being in the insurance model. It's a big adjustment for them. But like you said, you can't be all things to all folks, and you have to kind of, look at what's good for you as a practitioner, because physician burnout is at an all-time high. And I don't have any statistics on it, but I would suggest that it's probably much, much higher in traditional practice with the insurance nightmare than it is in the direct care model, where you actually can kind of control your life.
Definitely. I've not met a direct care doctor who's been in it for a little while who ever regretted opting out. I've met some doctors who went from employment to direct care fully cash, but went back on insurance contracts, mostly because they felt the discomfort of what everybody else is doing. They had the pushback from their referral sources saying, well, if you don't take insurance, we can't really refer to you, right? So these are certain skill sets that we need to have a direct care practice. And so there is a way to doing it, but those who do it successfully are very, very happy.
What was one of the biggest barriers to entry for you? I mean, you already acknowledged that it was not working out well for you from a financial standpoint. Was it the finances? Was it what was one of the, the hurdles? I mean, because it's a big decision-making process for people. It's not easy to make.
Yeah, I think my biggest hurdle was believing that people would actually pay cash for what I already knew. And it's just not taught anywhere in our training. We've not seen it in our training. It's not like I had an attending who had a cash practice and we did a rotation with to really see it in full life. And so most of my training was all surgical. So everybody had this belief that being employed was safe. It would be comfortable. It would help us pay back our debt. And so I kind of just rode the waves. And plus, with our current board certification process, we have to have a certain number of volume in order to get board certified. That added another layer of complexity. And so we just kind of were on this train track together. So we didn't know of a different way. And so it was hard to believe that the skill set I already had was deserving enough of a cash practice. So I did go on to learn more of specialty things to create a niche for myself. And I think it was through that where I saw that if I was truly going to have a direct care practice, something that was really different, I needed a really compelling reason for people to pay out of pocket for me beyond what I have, right? Beyond the skills that I already accumulated over 10 years. So I would say the biggest hurdle was myself. It's just the belief that people would actually pay cash what I had to offer.
It doesn't seem to be a problem in the veterinary world, and certainly in the plastic surgery world. I mean, and even dentistry. I mean, dentistry was pretty much direct care until, they started taking more and more insurances over the last couple of decades. And some of the dentists I've talked to really regret that, especially the older guys that remembered what it was like before they were, muddied the water, so to speak, with all of the insurance contracts and that. But, I think you make a great point. If you have a service that is valuable, there will be a subset of people who are willing to pay for it. And, that's what we've found. But it's not an easy choice by any means. And did you change the dynamics of your practice when you went to direct care? Because obviously you didn't have to pay billing or collections people. You were able to offload some of the overhead, right?
Yeah, the dynamics changed in a significant way, in a way that I didn't predict it. I love taking care of wound patients, patients who are at risk for amputations, but I love the entire spectrum of what we do, from prevention, nail care, palliative foot care, all the way to the end stages where they have an amputation and now we have to protect them from getting another amputation. In the insurance model, it is a sick care type of model. You only see the doctor when you're sick, which is how I ended up in the wound care center. Those are the people who needed us the most. They required a lot of resources. And so that was a lot of the work I was doing in the insurance-based model. When I started to opt out, I started to see less of those wound patients because it's just so expensive to be seen, to be taken care of, the grafts, the surgeries we have to do, the preventive care, and so on.
Right.
So I started to see less of that. And so part of my identity shifted with that because I thought my life was revolving around towards doing this specific thing, but I didn't see a lifelong way with it through the insurance. I could take care of these patients much faster if I didn't have to be on the phone doing a peer-to-peer, if I didn't have to talk to 20 people to book the surgery, to do the surgery in the OR. I got a little bit more aggressive in treating these patients in the wound clinic, minimally invasive procedures in the office, because I didn't want them to wait 6 weeks to do a tenotomy in order to resolve an ulcer that is caused by the contracture, right? So I just saw that I was able to do things much more efficiently. I could heal people much more faster if I did it my way. But when you heal people quickly, you're penalized, right? Because you only get paid the more often you see somebody. It's per visit,
Right.
per graft you put, per surgery you do. But if you can accomplish all of that in one visit with a surgery, that payment is done. You resolve their issue, you get paid actually less. So it's a really weird system to incentivize people to heal people. And it just didn't make sense to me eventually. So now I'm a lot more focused on people who are seeking cash practices like mine. Those people tend to be a lot more proactive. Maybe they had a history of an amputation, now they want to avoid it. So they know the system has failed them previously, and so now they're in my office. I speak to people who don't have insurance. They're business owners, but they don't want to pay the high premium for insurance, and so they just need quick care. They know it's efficient. They know who I am personally. They're not going to end up on a phone tree 15 minutes at a time before being seen, stuff like that.
Right.
And then I serve people who have a high insurance deductible, who they're like, I just need to be seen today. I don't want to wait 3 months. They value their time.
That's kind of an interesting comment right there, because the first 2 months of every year are essentially direct pay because there is these high deductibles. I mean, these people have $6,000, $8,000, $12,000 deductibles, which means they're paying, but somehow the psychological perspective is a little bit different for them.
Yeah,
you're
totally right. Yeah, that took me some time to discover that even if people had insurance, they're going to want to pay out of pocket because they need the thing that you have.
Right.
They're not going to wait until their deductibles are met.
Now, one of the things too that we do is, when we take care of them and they're direct pay, we give them an itemized super bill and a receipt, and then they can, if they have insurance, they can go battle it out with them. And they can do that battle rather than us doing that battle,
Mm-hmm.
But you're right. I mean, if you look at the surgical patient, you have to question whether or not it's even good economically for a regular practice, because as you mentioned, all right, let's look at the 15 different variables just to get them scheduled, right? Pre-auth.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have no idea really what is going to happen. You do that surgery, you know what your fee schedule is, but you have no idea what they're going to pay you. It's kind of like, okay, we're going to just do the service and well, whatever we get, we get. That's pretty much it. Because you can appeal and you're not going to usually win the appeal most of the time. Like it's rigged against you. And then you get to the hospital and the case is delayed. Okay. Now your time is money. And I think a lot of practitioners fail to see that. But let's say you book a 30-minute procedure in the hospital. And by the time you get there and go through all of the EMR requirements to get them back to the OR, and then, the guy that started the day off is delayed an hour or 2 hours or whatever. All of a sudden now you've spent a half a day for a 30-minute procedure, and you still haven't dictated the operative report and all of that other stuff to add on at the end. So when you really look at it, it's probably, not the best way to, if you're looking at it from an economical standpoint, that's clearly not a great use of time and resource.
Yeah. I have so many instances where I was so frustrated with the system that we were built or trained in to do surgeries in the hospital, to wait around literally all day because you keep getting bumped for other cases, not even just emergent cases, but other senior surgeons who take priority because their caseloads make more money for the hospital. Like it became a political problem.
Right.
And trying to take care of a patient, I don't know how to deal with the system like that. And it's expensive for the patient. You take a patient to the hospital, it's going to be a minimum of $10,000 just for the resources. And then the doctor gets paid, a couple $100, which didn't make any sense. Yeah.
Before we continue with this great discussion, I just want to take a quick break to acknowledge this week's sponsor.
Well, folks, if you are over 40 and you are not using a supplement to augment nitric oxide production, you should really think that. This molecule is absolutely imperative to health, not to mention its cardio protection. If you have any question on nitric oxide, I suggest that you go back and listen to the Pod of Inquiry, Season 1, Episode 3, for my conversation with one of the world's experts, Dr. Nathan Bryan. I never miss a day of nitric oxide supplementation. That's how important I believe it is. Long overdue, there is now a nitric oxide replenishment formula without the fear of oxalates. Approved Medical Solutions does not use beets, spinach, or arginine. Approved Medical Solutions is proud to offer our audience their oxalate-free nitric oxide formula. If you are not a healthcare provider, you can still get started by going to approvedmedicalsolutions.com and use the code SBarrett, all lowercase, at checkout, and you will receive a 10% medical discount savings. For licensed practitioners, go to approvedmedicalsolutions.com and register. They have unique bundles for all of the full-fledged spelunkers of the Pod of Inquiry. Use Pod of Inquiry at checkout after registration, and I'm certain you will be pleased not only for yourself, but all of your patients. Here's a little secret. If you order their testing strips and test every patient for a few clinic days, you will see every one of those patients will be nitric oxide deficient. When they see this result, they will want you to start them up immediately. Now, thanks to Approved Medical Solutions, you can give them the best care without the worry of oxalates. No, it doesn't make any sense. And then you have to look at, all right, what is your cost of goods, right? So you can't calculate it really because let's say the patient's non-compliant and they go swimming and get themselves infected. All of a sudden, now that case is a disaster, not only from an outcome standpoint, but it's a disaster from a resource standpoint too, because of everything that's built into the global situation. And it's just, it's not a great way to do business.
That reminds me of an early case I did in my residency program where I was with the microvascular surgeon and we put on this beautiful flap from the thigh to the foot. Beautiful case, perfect as could be. But he walked on it when he wasn't supposed to. There was a frame. Everything was where it was supposed to be. Right. Whatever happened, circumstances at home, fights happen. The flap failed at home. Had to bring him back and then make a decision. Do we try to salvage? And, salvage is expensive. Redo the whole thing was expensive. And what do we get paid at the end of it? Beyond the heartache. Right. Patient didn't really get better. Ended up with the baloney amputation. So there's just so many parts that medicine in itself is complicated. Why do we need to make it worse with
Right.
insurance?
Right. Well, at first, I think the insurance model was not as onerous as it is today. All right. And the interesting thing is, and I played the game long enough so I can recall historically some of the things that happened. But when I got in practice, it was pretty simple. You sent in a claim and they paid you 80%, and you had the check in a couple of weeks, and it was no big deal. Right. And, that seemed to work out fine. And then as it progressed, now you started getting these third-party administrators. And so what happened to premiums? The premiums went up majorly, right? So what you paid for health insurance in 1992 is not even close to what you're paying in 2022, even for the inflation-adjusted dollars. But so they started cutting these payments back. So for a procedure like, let's say, a bunionectomy, all right, in the early 90s, they may reimburse you nearly $2,000. Now today, what, $500? It's complex surgery, requires a hell of a lot of postoperative care. It requires a lot of expertise. Bunion surgery is not easy. And it's just one of those things like, wait a second, my overhead didn't go down from 1992 to now, and you've cut this down 75%, and we haven't even factored in the inflation adjusted dollars from back then to now. So it's really not a great program. I don't see a lot of long-term sustainability in the current model, because I think the burnout is too high, and it's just not a great system.
Yeah, it definitely cheapens our education. It's just a complete disrespect to what it takes to know what we know,
Right.
to the caliber that we know in taking care of patients. And it just is very obvious that the system is really out there to squeeze us out and replace us with cheaper alternatives, or just be automated. We're talking about AI now, even
Right.
trying to fill in the gaps or even replace us more expensive docs. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's real interesting if you look at the financial reports, the CEOs, the regional CEOs of United Healthcare, or some of these other big companies, they get these huge bonuses, right? It's not like that they've really passed on these increased costs that the folks are having to pay from a premium standpoint to deliver more optimal care. That certainly hasn't been the case.
Yeah.
And when you would talk to patients and they would say, well, are you getting paid more now that our premiums are going up? It's like, no, in fact, it's the opposite. Your premiums are going up and we're getting paid less.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's tough. But what was some of the things that you noticed when you went into direct care? Obviously, it gave you some freedom because it frees up time.
Mm-hmm. I think I was really surprised at how much time it did free up. And I almost felt nervous that I wasn't busy. We often equate productivity with being busy, but sometimes that busyness is just being on the phone with an insurance company for 40 minutes, right? It's
Right.
not productive. It doesn't add income or revenue. So I was really shocked at how much time I did get back, that it made me really nervous in the beginning, because I've never had a transition like this. I don't have mentors that told me this is normal. There's a process in the whole opting out sequence. So getting my time back was incredibly wonderful. I got to spend a lot of time with my daughter, picking up hobbies, talking to other doctors.
Which is time you'll never get back. She's only going to be that age now.
That's what I keep hearing.
Right.
And she's my first and only. And so I wanted to make sure that she knew mom would always be available, no matter what the circumstances were. It's something I didn't have, because my parents they immigrated here in the 80s. And so I didn't really get to have that connection with my parents. And I wanted to make sure that I had that with my daughter. So it was a nice gift to have with all that time back.
What did you find from a staffing standpoint? Were you able to reduce some of your overhead from a staffing because you don't need the billing people anymore, right?
Yes, I had outsourced the billing company initially, and then I brought somebody in-house who was then hourly. It was amazing to have her as the biller, but she was the one opting out for me. She's like, well, if you're going to keep opting out of insurances, I guess you don't need me anymore. So she resigned, and I kept her on just to finish out some of my last stuff that was coming in. But it was nice to downsize because I don't need the space. I don't need all of the equipment, computers, software stuff, like the papers,
Right.
mail, like all these little things that we don't account for.
Right.
It adds up. And so it was lovely to downsize. I love my micro practice because right now it's just me and a virtual assistant. Sometimes I have somebody in-house part-time to help out, but I'm just very comfortable where I'm at. Before I had 2 full-time employees. Each one of them took $20 an hour, plus insurance benefits that I paid into, which was about $500-$600 a person per month. Plus I had to deal with some of the PTO, time off, like stuff
Right.
I don't want to think about. I want them to be happy, but I also need to have some balance too. So when I started to opt out, they saw that as well. So one chose to leave. She needed a full-time job. The other had stayed with me throughout the whole change and transition, and she was very nervous about the change because nobody heard about a medical practice that was cash at that time. But when she saw the change, she had a shift in her workload too. It was easier for her. So it
Right.
made it more enjoyable as well.
Right. Yeah, I think the one thing that I felt was that I have so much more connection with the patients now because I'm able to sit down and really spend quality time with them. And that's a big value. And when you're running so fast and trying to get all of this stuff done, you talk about being busy, doesn't mean you're productive. It just means you're constantly putting out these little fires all the time. One of the real funny stories is I've been fortunate enough to have nerve fellows for the last 6 years now. And the first thing in their job description is keep Dr. B away from the computer because he hates the computer. But on those days when the nerve fellows, somewhere training or something like that, and I had to do it, it's like, oh, that's so stressful because you'd put in, you'd log in, and then if you weren't active on the computer after 90 seconds, it would log you out. So you had to have another password, and then you had to have the 2-factor authorization on your phone. And hell, by the time you'd get back into the computer, it took you 4 or 5 minutes. And it was like, well, okay, multiply that by 20 people in a day. And you can see how it just soaks up your time and energy very quickly. So the best thing, I think the best thing about direct care is I'm not clicking a bunch of bullet points that are irrelevant for that patient, and I can actually treat that patient and not have to treat that damn computer. I mean, I know you've gone to the physician as a patient yourself. Hell, their head's buried in their screen and they're just typing away, and they might look up at you every once in a while. It's like, oh yeah, I'm over here, type of thing. It's like they're just treating the damn computer because that's how they get paid. You have to create this monster note just to justify a mid-level office visit. And that's not the game. That's not the right way to take care of people.
I do love doing everything. I am now doing everything from setting up the exam room, cleaning up, everything. I love doing it because it gives me a moment to just reflect how wonderful this practice is. And I get to spend every single moment with the patient. And if the patient was unclear, or if they had a caregiver or a parent or a spouse who needed clarification, I'm not bitter about those phone calls because my time has been accounted for. I get paid for those things.
Right.
And so it's a lot more rewarding versus when I had to answer to somebody who wasn't in the room, but they would demand for me to call them and re-explain everything for what I said to the patient. And it's like, who's going to pay me for that time? Not your insurance. And
No.
you certainly aren't. And so those little things start to build up as resentment. And then suddenly you hate your practice, and then you think you hate medicine, but in reality, it's the system that
Right.
is not really working in your favor.
Right. Well, now that you're dialed into the direct care, and I see a lot of the things that you're doing, and some of the publications that have been out there, and the Podiatry Today article that you had, and what's your sense of the level of direct care now? Is it less than 1% still, or what do you think the numbers are out there?
Yeah, we don't have a place where people log in and say we have a direct care practice, right? There's
Right.
no
Right.
census on that.
Right.
What I do know is that there are alliances like the dscalliance.org, where we're trying to get people to self-volunteer and put themselves on, listed as a direct care practice. So I don't know what that looks like. I believe it's less than 1% of all physicians. So it's not just podiatrists, there's MDs and DOs as well. Of those, only 1% are direct care. So we are the 1% who's doing the thing against, what everyone else is doing. What I've seen is a lot more people who inquire about it through my website, on my podcast, or asking me directly in a bigger volume. So they'll say the same thing: I don't have any resources. Everything I have is in a library bank. And I think just getting people to talk about it has like a snowball effect.
Mhm.
Back when in 2020, it was just like maybe you heard about a couple people, but now it's like you're 6 degrees away from somebody who has a direct care practice, right? So
Right.
I've seen an exponential growth in at least interest. If not, people are doing something to increase their cash flow by offering non-covered services, or they're having that hybrid where maybe they're not going to contract with all insurances, but maybe one or two.
Right.
So their tolerance for that is just a little bit less, but still less dependent on insurances, so they can just have more time and do what they need to do for patients.
Yeah, I think one of the barriers to entry is the economic uncertainty, and the young folks that are coming out now. I mean, the amount of student debt is just astronomical, and so there's a lot of things I think that people perceive that are insurmountable, and I don't know what your take on it, but I would think it'd be more difficult for the newer practitioner than maybe the old dog like me that's been around for a long, long time and says, well, hell, I'm going to either quit the whole game completely or I'm going to go to the direct care model, which is kind of my story, because I was so frustrated with the whole thing. I didn't care, right? I mean, literally, it was like, if I see one person in the next year, I win, because I'm actually getting to take care of somebody and not have to treat all of this superfluous nonsense. And, but I would think, for the young people coming out, that's got to be a big hurdle for them, because how do they pay for their student loans?
The conversation we need to have really is, what do we do with that student loan, right? Like, do we have to max out our loans in the first place?
Right.
And then after we get them, how are you spending? Are you coming out with debt, acting like you don't have debt, buying a house, getting a car, like all the luxuries that you feel like you were deprived of in your training, and now suddenly you think because you get paid that you have all this money? But it's just really having some financial literacy and managing that money, and not waiting for that one job to pay it off, but having different income revenue, right?
Mm-hmm.
Number one is always a bad number in business. And so I think there's no way around the student loan debt, right? Medical school is expensive and it continues to go up. But I think if we start from the beginning and are much more mindful about how we spend that money, and maybe look into having a part-time job or some other source of income as a way to just leverage our personal financial power, so that when we do go out, we're not dependent on the one job to help secure our financial freedom, pay off our debt, and then we live our lives when we're retired.
Right.
So yeah, it's a huge deal to take out a $250,000 debt and then think and believe and trust that the system's going to pay us a healthy amount to pay that back, but also want to have autonomy in the way we practice. You can't have both. You have to choose.
No.
So what are you going to choose? Autonomy or a comfortable paycheck? And that's an individual choice. So for me, it's just me and my husband taking care of my daughter. There's a lot of weight, emotional weight with that. We're both surgeons. We have to be in the OR. We can't just drop our knives to pick up our kid or whatever it is, right? So having another source of income is really important to have a direct care practice, whether it be a partner, backup plan, whatever.
Right.
So yeah, don't jump into it thinking that you're just going to make the bang for money that you want. You have to build into it, but that comes with some level of financial literacy, understanding how to spend the money really well and then investing some of that as well.
Right. Well, and I think, at least for myself, there comes a point when you have to value time and happiness and less stress. And those things, there might be less zeros in the bank account, but how many more aspects of your life improve so much, right? And I'll tell you, I didn't realize the amount of stress that I was under until it went away, and it's like, oh, wait a second, something's wrong here. I don't feel like I have to run 90 miles an hour. I don't have to have 35 things on my to-do list before I go to the clinic, the next morning because of all of the extraneous stuff that's put on you. So, I think you have to look at it from a quality of life standpoint too. And I can't speak for everybody. Some people just want to amass millions of dollars and put all of these zeros on their bank account and all this other stuff, but then they drop dead because they've never had any time to enjoy their life and all of the stress and that type of thing. So, I think there is a balance. I know that everybody talks about the work-life balance. I'm not sure there is such a thing, but I think we can get it closer to being balanced than the unbalanced nature that a lot of times we're running around in,
I bet you if we just surveyed all of our physician friends right now and asked, are you stressed? They're probably going to say no, like, no, this is normal, right?
Right.
We have normalized stress to the point where we don't recognize there are physiological changes in ourselves, the way we sleep, the way we eat, the way we respond to outside stress. It gets impacted. And you're not the first person to say that you didn't know you were experiencing stress until you left an environment that made you stressful.
Right.
And I get to coach a lot of doctors who say the same thing. They didn't know that the insurance-based model was the cause of their burnout. They thought it was just medicine. Those are two very different things. You can love being with the patient.
Right.
And you can hate the system and how it pays you. They're different. So I try to help people tease out, is it the medicine part that you hate or the delivery of it?
Right.
Two different things.
Well, and then one of the things too is that when we talk about delivery of care, and this sometimes flies under the radar, but the insurance companies with all their foolishness require you to do things that are not in the best interest of the patient or cut to the chase, right? Let's say it's a definitive surgical problem and they want you to exhaust 6 months of conservative care. For what? Okay, now you've just wasted 6 months of that patient's life with ineffective treatments, but that's how you got to get paid because that's what the insurance industry is telling you you have to do in order for us to dole out a payment to you at some point in time. So they really control a lot of how you're managing your patient's care. And I think one of the things that a lot of physicians really love is the autonomy of being able to take all of this knowledge that they've amassed throughout all of their training and really craft an individual tailored treatment plan for that particular patient. But yet they can't do that because the system won't let them do that. And that wears on you over a period of time. I can't recall how many times I've been in a treatment room with a patient and it's like, I'm sorry, the insurance won't pay for this. We're going to have to do something else. When the something else wasn't even really close to being as good as what we were going to, intervene with. So, and I think that cumulatively builds up in people too. But I agree with you 100%. I don't think the burnout is because they hate medicine. they hate the arena that they're having to play medicine in. It's a hostile environment.
Mm-hmm.
They're not being allowed to really be what they've trained to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, you don't have to sell me the story.
No. And I'm not even trying to sell myself. I've lived it. And, I look back and it's like, God, if I would have done this over, I probably should have done this about 15 years ago. It would have been totally different,
Yeah.
But yeah,
And I say the same thing. Like, I wish somewhere along our training, somebody came in and was like, you don't have to work with insurance.
right.
And I don't know why that wasn't available.
Well, it takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of belief in yourself that you're able to, communicate your niche, and not everybody is real comfortable in that space right away. Well, let's talk about how they can access some of the stuff that you're doing, contact you, and then you mentioned another. What was it? A website for direct care? Is that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's an alliance of other specialties where you can just go to the website called dscalliance.org, and that stands for Direct Specialty Care Alliance.org, which is kind of a library or a membership to other doctors who just want to be placed on a map,
Mm-hmm.
so that we can connect with each other collegially or to help refer patients for specific specialties. So that is it's been in the works for a little while. It's building. So the more people who can contribute, the more connection we can have to help patients find the right doctor for them. That's something that I'm a part of. I try to promote just to help kind of find a place for all of us to live.
Mm-hmm.
There is a dpcalliance.org, which is for the direct primary care doctors. That's where it originated from. But primary is different from specialty care. We really wanted to have one of our own and be really unique in our offerings. I don't know if there's a lot more coming up in the way of people trying to create a system to put us all in one place, but those are the two I would stick with. My website is teadpm.com. When you go there, you'll see two links, one that shows you what my website looks like for direct care, and then one that takes you to the consulting side of my practice, where you'll have the links to my podcast called The Direct Care Way. I also have an easy 12-week course if you wanted to just do the thing on your own and start opting out or start learning about the specific strategies and what it takes to have a direct care practice. Through the course, I do a monthly coaching call to help everyone troubleshoot where they're at specifically in their phase of transition.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm trying to create a community amongst not just podiatrists, but other specialists as well, because we have a lot in common that we can share.
Right.
So those are my main resources.
That's awesome. I wished I would have had that resource about a year ago when I started to make the decision to go to direct care. I would have signed up for your program right away. But
well, you did reach out. You actually reached out.
Yeah.
Do you remember you reached out a little bit?
And I do.
It was before I had the course, and all the questions that you asked are now answered in that course.
Yeah. Well, we have to get people who are thinking about this to your website, because when you have a warrior like yourself that's gone through the battle, that's battle-tested information is always the best stuff. So anyhow, I look forward to looking at your podcast too. And maybe someday you can let me come on and talk about how I skinned my knees trying to get out of the old world, but
the old world.
Yeah. So anyhow, well, T, thanks so much for coming on today. I really appreciate you, and look forward to having more great discussions with you. And I wish you the best.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. I wish you the best as well in your new career.
Thank you. All righty. I'll talk to you later. Based on the very positive and inquisitive feedback that I've received from my conversation with Dr. Robert Kornfeld, which was Season 2, Episode 4, which we discussed the integration of functional medicine into your podiatric medical practice, I wanted to share with you my personal experience and why you should really think about taking Dr. Kornfeld's excellent functional medicine course. Over 20 years ago, I quickly learned that we had to treat the whole patient, not just the symptom down in their lower extremity. But I did not have the luxury of being able to obtain something like Dr. Kornfeld's training course. I had to piece it all together. And truthfully, I am still piecing it together, as it is a constant and evolutionary process that will never end because new information is always becoming more and more available. But by taking his well-constructed course, you will have a strong foundation to continue that building upon. And oh yeah, maybe the best thing is that this will allow you to have the platform to launch out of the imprisonment of third-party insurance, which will improve your life. Think stress reduction here now, folks. And at the same time, you'll be able to optimize the lives of your patients. If you want to go from dysfunction to full function, start here right now. Functional medicine provides you with the powerful niche that will allow you to go into the direct pay model and be done with the insanity of participating with insurance. Go to his website now and tell him we sent you, because you don't want to be dysfunctional anymore. To get on board with this fantastic educational opportunity, go to Dr. Kornfeld's website, instituteforfunctionalpodiatricmedicine.com. That's instituteforfunctionalpodiatricmedicine.com.
We hope you all enjoyed today's show and got some truly empowering knowledge out of it. You can always follow up on anything we talked about in the show notes, found at our website, podofinquiry.com. If this incredible and educational conversation has tickled just a little bit of your cortex, please leave us a review and spread the message to your friends and colleagues. Let's keep spelunking.
This podcast is designed for informational purposes only and does not constitute any medical or surgical consulting advice or imply a development of any physician-patient relationship. The opinions of guests who are featured on the show are not necessarily the opinions of Dr. Barrett or the production team. This podcast is owned solely by Barrett Medical and Surgical Media, LLC. While the show is highly oriented for physicians and healthcare providers, anyone interested in the improvement of human performance and understanding will find this a welcome goblet to sip from, or guzzle. However, no representation or warranties are made in any way whatsoever on this podcast for any products, techniques, or other things discussed. Invited guests are not vetted by the Pod of Inquiry for their qualifications and may have a direct or indirect financial interest in what they present and discuss on the show. The Pod of Inquiry disclaims any responsibility from anything taken from the show and used personally or professionally. It is a responsibility of the listener to perform their own due diligence prior to the implementation of any ideas, products, techniques, or anything talked about on the show.